For this video, we're going to be covering how to write absolute value equations and absolute value inequalities if you're given their graphs. So the general form for an absolute value equation or inequality looks like this, and it's kind of a weird looking thing. It's always going to be the absolute value of x minus, this is going to be a number, and that number represents the center of the absolute value. And then the symbol, it's either going to be a greater than, an equal to, or a less than symbol. And that's going to be equal, greater than, less than the distance. So we're just going to have some other number over here. And this looks a little weird now, but it'll make more sense as we go. So the center is just the average of the 2 points that you can see on the graph. Hopefully you remember that to find the average of 2 points, you just take the 2 points, add them together, and divide by 2. The distance is the distance from the center point to one of the 2 points. And that's very easy to find too. Once you find the center, you just take one of the 2 points and do that point minus the center, and that will give you your distance. Okay, so one thing we want to talk about is how to determine the sign based on the graph. So if you look at your graph, you're going to have 3 options. There's going to be no shading at all, so you're just looking at 2 points. There's going to be a graph where the shading is between the 2 points, or it might be a graph where the shading is outside of the 2 points and not between them. And looking at these will tell you, are you looking at an equal to, a less than, or a greater than? Okay, you can determine the sign by how it is shaded. No shading tells you equal to. Shaded between tells you either less than or equal to. To determine which one of these to use, look at the circles. If the circles are open, then it's less than. If the circles were closed, then it would be less than or equal to. If it's shaded outside, then you're talking about a greater than or equal to inequality. Once again, to determine which of these to use, look at the circles. No filled or open circles tell you greater than, closed circles tell you greater than or equal to. Let's talk about the steps to write an absolute value equation or inequality based on a graph. Step 1 is to determine the sign, like I just showed you how to do. Step 2, find the center by taking the average of the 2 points. Step 3, find the distance by subtracting the center from the right point of the graph. And step 4 is just to write your equation or inequality. So let's go ahead and do this. All right, so here's example 1. I want to write the equation or inequality for this graph. So step 1, find the sign. Well, to find the sign, I want to look at the shading. This one is shaded between our 2 points, and I know that between means less than. The circles are open, so there's no equal to on there. Okay, so I've got less than. Now I want to find the center. To find the center, I take the average of my 2 points, -4 and 2. So to find the average, the way I'm going to do that, I take -4 plus 2, and I divide that by 2. Well, -4 plus 2, that's -2, and -2 divided by 2, that's -1. So this point right here, -1, that's the exact center of my graph. So for center, that's going to be -1. Okay, now to find the distance. To find the distance, I just subtract. I'm going to take the rightmost point, okay, which is 2, and I'm just going to go that point minus the center, 2 minus -1, okay, which hopefully you remember when you subtract a negative, this becomes a positive. 2 plus 1 equals 3. So my distance is 3. And you can kind of tell that just from looking at the graph. Once I've plotted the center, if I count over 1, 2, 3 spaces, that's my distance. I can do the same thing in the other direction. 1, 2, 3 spaces. So these are both -4 and +2 are both 3 spaces away from our center at -1. This is another way you could figure out the distance once you knew the center. So my next step is just to write my inequality. So plug in what I know, x minus my center, -1. We know that this is less than because it's shaded between. And my result is my distance, which is 3. Now I just want to clean this up a little bit. Minus -1 is the same thing as +1. And for some reason that's a little hard to see right now. There you go. Now it popped back up. Okay, so minus negative the same -1 is the same thing as +1. So I can now see that this works out to be the absolute value of x plus 1 is less than 3. And that's it. All right, we've got another example here. Example 2 says I want to write an equation or inequality for this graph. So I've got a point at -9 and a point at 5. And if you notice, there is no shading at all. So referring back to your notes, you can see no shading tells me that this is an equal to graph. Now I want to find the center by averaging these 2 points. So I do -9 this point plus 5 this point and divide by 2. -9 plus 5 is -4, and -4 divided by 2 is -2. So the center is this point right here at -2. Now to find the distance, 2 methods. I can do my subtraction. 5 minus the center, so 1.5 minus the center, -2. We know that's the same thing as saying 5 plus 2, and that gives me 7. Okay, or I could, sorry, I forgot to write these in here. Instead of doing the subtraction, once I knew the center, I could just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spaces, or the same thing in the other direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spaces. Okay, either way, doesn't matter. You can do it this algebraic method, or you can do it this way graphically. Either way, you get 7. And now you just need to write this down. All right, x minus my center, -2, equals, because there's no shading, my result of 7, my distance. Want to clean this up? This is minus a negative is the same thing as +2, so I get absolute value of x plus 2 equals 7. And there we go. That is how you can write an equation or an inequality for an absolute value given the graph.